Prenatal emotion, consciousness, and the hidden architecture of personality. Most of us believe we already know the answer to a fundamental question, a question so familiar that we rarely pause to examine it. When does a human being truly begin? For most people in the modern Western world, the answer feels obvious. We assume that the self begins at birth, with the first breath, the first cry, the first moment of separation from the mother's body. But what if this assumption is incomplete? What if the story of who we are begins long before we open our eyes to the world? This lecture was created to explore that very possibility. Not from sentiment, not from mysticism alone, but from the intersection of ancient contemplative traditions and modern developmental science. Two domains that, surprisingly, are beginning to speak a similar language. Beyond parenting. Returning to the earliest origin of personality. When we talk about a child's personality, we usually frame the discussion in familiar terms. We say, they were born that way. It's genetic. It's the result of parenting. It's the environment after birth. And of course, all of these factors matter. But what if personality does not begin with parenting? What if education, discipline, attachment, and socialization are not the starting point, but rather the second chapter of a much earlier story? This lecture invites us to move backward, past early childhood, past infancy, past birth itself, to a far more primordial stage of human development, the emotional environment of the womb, the first world a human being ever knows. Before a child encounters language, culture, or social rules, before they experience praise or rejection, safety or threat in the external world, they exist within a very different reality. A reality without images or concepts, without words or explanations. And yet it is not empty. The fetus does not float in a neutral void. From the earliest stages of neural development, the unborn child is immersed in patterns, rhythmic patterns of heartbeat, hormonal patterns of stress or calm, physiological signals of safety or danger, emotional fluctuations transmitted through the mother's nervous system. From a neurodevelopmental perspective, this is not speculation. We now know that. Stress hormones cross the placenta. Autonomic nervous system activity is shared. Emotional states shape fetal brain wiring. Early neural circuits are tuned to patterns of threat, stability, or unpredictability. In other words, the womb is not merely a biological container. It is the first environment, the first world, the first emotional climate a human being ever experiences. The question that shapes a lifetime. Every human nervous system must answer one question before all others. Is this world safe or dangerous? This question is not answered through logic. It is answered through sensation. And for the unborn child, the mother's emotional state becomes the lens through which that question is first interpreted. Calm does not register as a thought. Anxiety does not arrive as a belief. Anger is not understood as a narrative. Instead, these emotions arrive as patterns of energy, rhythm, and intensity. To the developing nervous system, emotion is information, and information becomes structure, where ancient wisdom and modern science quietly agree. Here, something remarkable happens. Modern developmental neuroscience, armed with fMRI data, hormonal analysis, and longitudinal studies, begins to echo ideas found in ancient contemplative traditions. In Tibetan Buddhism, consciousness is not understood as something that suddenly appears at birth. Rather, it is seen as a continuous stream flowing through death, transition, and rebirth. Within this framework, the fetus is not a passive biological object. It is a sentient being in formation, sensitive to vibration, emotional resonance, and relational atmosphere. The Bardo Todal, often known in the West as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, describes this process using symbolic language. Consciousness moving through transitional states, responding to light, sound, and emotional pull, being drawn toward a new life, not randomly, but relationally. While modern science does not speak in these symbolic terms, it increasingly confirms a parallel insight. The fetal brain is actively adapting to the emotional conditions it encounters, not consciously, but structurally. Emotional climate as the blueprint of personality. Think of the womb as a climate system, not weather, but climate. Weather changes daily. Climate shapes ecosystems. In the same way, momentary emotions are weather. Repeated emotional patterns become climate. And climate determines what kinds of psychological plants are most likely to grow. A nervous system shaped in calm conditions learns regulation, trust, emotional elasticity. A nervous system shaped in unpredictable or threatening conditions learns vigilance, rapid response, heightened sensitivity. Neither is inherently good or bad. Both are forms of adaptation. What we often label later in life as overreactive, too sensitive, emotionally intense, withdrawn, aggressive, may in fact be early survival strategies learned before the child ever took their first breath. Who this lecture is for? This lecture is for several groups of people. It is for parents, those who are expecting, those who have given birth, and those reflecting on their parenting journey, not to induce guilt, but to deepen understanding. It is for individuals seeking to understand their own emotional patterns, especially those who have asked themselves, even once, why am I like this? And it is for anyone who wishes to move beyond moral judgments of personality, beyond labeling traits as defects, toward understanding them as adaptive responses to early emotional environments. This is not about blame. It is about context, reframing sensitivity, anxiety, and intensity. When we reframe personality through this lens, something profound happens. Sensitivity is no longer weakness. It is evidence of a nervous system trained to detect subtle shifts. Anxiety is no longer irrational. It is a memory of unpredictability encoded before language. Emotional intensity is no longer pathology. It is the echo of an environment that required rapid response. By understanding the prenatal origins of these traits, we move from judgment to comprehension, from stigma to compassion, returning to the original question. So we return once again to the question we began with. When does a human being truly begin? Is it at birth, or does the beginning occur earlier? In the silent, wordless world where emotion is felt before it is named, where the nervous system is shaped before the mind forms beliefs, where the first relationship, a relationship with the mother's emotional state, quietly lays the foundation for personality. In the rest of this lecture series, we will explore this question in depth. We will examine how specific maternal emotional states, anxiety, anger, sadness, calm, joy, are experienced by the fetus as distinct worlds. And we will follow how those early worlds leave traces that echo through a lifetime. Before we do, I invite you to pause, because understanding where personality begins is not just an academic exercise. It is an act of empathy for our children, for others, and for ourselves. The second world a human learns to live in. How calm, sadness, and joy shape the inner architecture of the self. Let us now move deeper into the prenatal world, not toward crisis or danger, but toward the quieter emotional climates that shape a very different kind of personality. Because not all emotional imprints are loud. Some of the most powerful ones are subtle, slow, and inward. The child formed in emotional depth. When a fetus repeatedly encounters an emotional environment marked by sadness or emotional heaviness, a distinct inner structure begins to take shape. This child often grows into a person who is emotionally nuanced and sensitive, deeply introspective, reflective rather than reactive, and especially vulnerable to emotional fluctuations. This is not weakness, it is depth. To understand this personality, we must momentarily step out of adult logic and enter the world as the fetus experiences it. The world as felt from within. Narrative from the fetal perspective. The world is quiet. It feels like sound heard underwater, soft, distant, and deep. My mother's heart sends waves of sadness. They do not crash. They move slowly, enveloping me. I learned that the world carries weight, that emotions do not pass quickly here. So I began to listen carefully. I attend to the smallest emotional shifts. I learned to feel deeply and to think before I move. This is how inner worlds are born. When the mother feels calm and stable, the formation of secure attachment. Now let us consider a very different emotional climate. When a mother experiences calm, emotional regulation, and inner stability, the fetus encounters something rare and profoundly formative. Calm does not arrive as excitement. It arrives as predictability, as warm, even physiological rhythms, steady heartbeats, smooth hormonal patterns, and a sense of emotional continuity. To the fetus, this feels like safe atmosphere, a world where nothing urgent needs to be solved. The personality that emerges. Children shaped in this emotional climate tend to develop a high level of basic trust, emotional stability in relationships, calm responses under pressure, adaptability to unfamiliar environments. This is the psychological foundation of secure attachment. The fetal perspective. My mother's heart is like a song with a steady rhythm. I float within a warm, reliable current. The world feels welcoming. Curiosity arrives before fear. I learned something essential. It is okay to exist. This sensation, it is okay to exist, becomes one of the most powerful psychological anchors a human being can carry into life. When the mother feels joy and anticipation, the roots of creativity and optimism. Joy is different from calm. Joy is movement. When a mother frequently experiences joy, excitement, or positive anticipation, the fetus encounters emotional energy that feels like light, warmth, gentle expansion, playful rhythm. Neurochemically, this environment is marked by dopamine, oxytocin, endorphins. But subjectively, to the fetus, it feels like welcome. The personality that emerges. Children shaped by repeated exposure to joy tend to become optimistic, open to novelty, emotionally flexible, creatively inclined, and relatively skilled at emotional regulation. They approach the world not as a threat to manage, but as a space to explore. The fetal perspective. Light fills the space around me. Warm waves move as if they are dancing. This world feels beautiful. I learned that existence itself is a gift, and so I grow curious. I grow open. This is how hope becomes embodied before language ever exists. Why is the fetus so emotionally sensitive? This sensitivity is not mystical. It is biological and structural. 1. Hormonal transmission. The mother's emotional state directly alters her hormonal profile. Hormones such as cortisol, serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin cross the placenta and shape fetal brain development. Emotion, in other words, becomes neurochemical instruction. 2. Rhythmic transmission. The fetus experiences the mother's heartbeat as a constant background rhythm. Anxiety accelerates it. Joy regularizes it. Depression dampens it. This rhythmic environment becomes the training ground for the child's future emotional regulation system. 3. A Tibetan perspective. Emotion as energy. In Tibetan philosophy, emotions are understood as energetic qualities, colors of light, frequencies of vibration, movements of inner wind. From this view, the mother's emotional state does not merely influence the fetus, it surrounds consciousness as a world. The womb becomes a universe with its own emotional climate. The first worlds the fetus learns to live in. From the fetal perspective, anxiety feels like a shaking room, unpredictable and unstable. Anger feels like a battlefield, hot, loud, urgent. Sadness feels like deep water, slow, heavy, quiet. Calm feels like gentle waves, steady and reliable. Joy feels like warm light, inviting and expansive. Each of these worlds teaches the nervous system how to survive. The 5 foundational questions of personality. Although the fetus cannot speak, it learns through sensation to answer 5 existential questions. 1. Is this world safe? 2. Is it dangerous? 3. Can others be trusted? 4. Is existence warm or cold? 5. Is life predictable? The answers become implicit beliefs carried into adulthood. They shape attachment style, emotional reactivity, stress sensitivity, optimism or defensiveness, relational behavior, emotional imprints, and neural structure. This process is known in neuroscience as emotional neural structuring. Emotion leaves traces. Traces become circuits. Circuits become personality. Repeated emotional climates wire the brain towards specific patterns of interpretation and response. Why prenatal emotional memory lasts. Most early memories disappear, but emotional memory does not. Psychology distinguishes between explicit verbal memory and implicit emotional and bodily memory. Prenatal experience is stored almost entirely as implicit memory. That is why, as adults, people often say, "I don't know why, but the world feels unsafe. I trust people easily. I feel emotions very deep. I react before I think." These are not random traits. They are echoes. Darkness, filled with meaning. The fetus lives in darkness, but not emptiness. That darkness is filled with rhythm, breath, tension, and release. Emotional temperature. In that emotional universe, the fetus forms its first philosophy of life. Personality is not fate, but direction. Neuroplasticity ensures that personality can change, but early emotional patterns leave a directional imprint, a seed, not a destiny. Sensitive children can become empathetic adults. Stable children can become resilient leaders. Joy-shaped children can become creative thinkers. What matters is how the seed is met by later environments. The final insight. The fetus cannot speak, but it learns constantly. The emotional environment of pregnancy is not background noise. It is the first teacher, the first philosophy lesson, the first answer to the question, what kind of world is this? And that answer is written long before birth. If this lecture helped you see human development more deeply, I invite you to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Your support allows these long-form philosophical explorations to continue. Thank you for thinking deeply with me.